In this video, I'm sharing my tips on how to deal with negative feedback by a client or a superior. Coming up. Hello and welcome back to the Freelance verse. In this week's video, I want to address something that's not only important for freelancers, but also for employed people, of course. It's negative feedback. If you are in some kind of working relationship, you most likely had to deal with negative feedback already, and sometimes it can be quite tricky how to deal with it. I also struggled with this myself. Especially when you're a freelancer, you're kind of responsible yourself for what comes your way, right? You don't have an organization or a boss that usually protects you. So it can be quite tough to deal with it, and I had to learn this myself over the years. So I wanted to share with you a couple of tips on how I deal with it or how I try to deal with it. And let me know in the comments if you have some kind of tips. So for me, the most important thing is no matter how harsh a feedback is, how you react to it and how you deal with it can influence the problem itself a great deal, right? So if you take everything that comes your way personally and you feel attacked by the people that give you feedback, it tends to become more and more of a problem, and it can really turn into the worst, which would be losing the client, like finishing the working relationship. So you really want to just take a step back whenever something comes in and assess, do I really want to feel personally attacked? Do I really want to respond in the way that I'm about to respond in the heat of the moment? Which brings me to part one actually, which is your reaction, your initial reaction to negative feedback. In my case, when you're a translator, you most likely get negative feedback to something you delivered, right? And it's going to happen inevitably, because if you work like me, I work with a lot of different jobs. Usually they're quite small, so I tend to have several deadlines per day. Maybe I deliver like 5 to 10 jobs per day. And of course, it's going to happen that some of them are not up to standard. That can be subjective based on the client's gut feeling, because translation is not a strict science, not an exact science, right? The way that you write maybe doesn't appeal to someone else, and they see it as a bad translation, even though it's perfectly fine. It's just not how they like it. You most likely get the feedback per email. If it's really urgent, someone might call you, but I'm just going to focus on the email part now because the call is really scary, and practicing it in the email case also helps you then if once they call you directly. So let's assume they write you an email and they say, hey, Adrian, look, you delivered this translation, our client. If it's an agency, they might say our client is not happy. If it's a direct client, they usually speak for themselves, right? Maybe the proofreader checked it and they said that the quality wasn't up to standards. Can you please give us a feedback on what you think? That's usually the standard feedback, right? So the first thing that comes to everyone's mind, I feel like, when you're a translator and you do something in a creative way, you want to refuse it. You want to block the feedback, because you deliver something that's part of you, right? You made this and you delivered it and you were convinced that it's good. So what my number one tip is, don't respond immediately, because your immediate reaction won't be what the client wants to hear, right? So I read the feedback, I take a few minutes, maybe half an hour time, just to cool down, say it's okay, this happens once in a while, and then I write a short email saying, I'm very sorry that the quality wasn't up to the standards. I will review it and get back to you with a detailed review and explanation. Because that way you responded already in a first email, but you don't really take responsibility or shift responsibility away yet. You just acknowledge the feedback and you will contact them once you reviewed it, because you need to review it. It can go both ways. You can't just immediately respond to it. And usually the people accept this email and they feel acknowledged because you answered. If you just don't respond and you plan to check the feedback and respond in a few hours, they might, I don't know, wonder why doesn't he answer? What's the problem, you know? So just acknowledge the feedback and say you will contact them. Number two, really important in this first interaction and in the whole process, don't get defensive, right? Don't get aggressive or defensive. It doesn't matter. It's just a business interaction. It happens all the time. It's probably on a small scale in the grand scheme of things, you know, so no one tells you about the 99% of positive translations that you did. Maybe you get once a positive feedback, that's nice, but usually it's just taken for granted. So Just keep in mind that this is not the norm. Don't get defensive, just keep it professional. Next point is do your research, and really do this well, because this decides how the next step will go. If you take responsibility or if you are able to shift it, which we hope, right? Yeah, so really do your research. Go through every comment, respond to them individually. If it's a mistake by you, own up to it. If it's just an overall feedback that they give you, maybe at this point you can, still look at it, do your research, but also ask them, I can't really go through the whole thing again because, it takes a lot of time. So please give me some indication of what I should look out for. What were you not happy with? Please give me some more info so I can go give you a more detailed explanation of why I did things that way. The next part is the response in detail to the client, right? And at this point, it's very important that you don't just face off against them. It's not helpful. The position you want to take is understanding. They have a problem. Probably, the person that writes you is probably never the one that actually has a problem, right? Don't attack this person, because even if it's not your fault, this person, it's definitely not their fault as well. So don't go head first into the argument. Try to align side by side, try to find solutions, and just be polite, be helpful. What's important in this step is what you've done in the research before. So you probably found out if it was your fault, if it was not your fault, or if it's a mix. It's usually a mix. Can spoil it. Usually you find things that, you should have thought of, you should have done differently, and some things are really subjective. As I said, translation is not exact. So if someone tells you, you should have used this word here, you should have used this word, that's not your fault, because if it's really not wrong, assuming it's correct, but not the style, not the terminology that the client wanted, then what they should have done is given you a terminology list, right? Given you a term base, they call it in the CAD tools, where you can actually find translations that they already approved. So this you can also include in your answer. I would just go through step by step. This point, yes, it's my fault. I'm sorry, this was a mistake. Next point, it's subjective. Next point, my initial translation was actually correct. The client's feedback doesn't make sense. Explain point by point why. And if it's your fault, be honest, be concise. Say, I'm sorry, this happens sometimes. I try to do my best to that it doesn't happen again. Because honesty will really bring you much further in this case. Also, in general, if you're honest with a client, you build a better relationship with them, right? You show weakness, but only to an extent that they understand that you're human, that you want to help them, that you're sorry for your actions, and they trust you in return. And this can really go a long way, right? If you see an opportunity to show a certain extent of weakness and kind of humility, show it to the client, and they will. That's why they work with freelancers, right? They don't want the corporate entities to go through 7 different stages to actually meet the person they are dealing with. They work with you because they want the human touch, right? So really show this. It's not a weakness to show humility and to show you make mistakes sometimes. It's human. Don't be afraid to show that. The next very important step is always include solutions in your response, right? Never say, that just happened, I'm sorry, that's it. Never. Always offer solutions. Even if it's just a solution that you will say, okay, I do this and this to implement into my workflow so it won't happen again. Or say, if you want me to, I can review the translation again and adapt it to a more suitable style for the client. Or if it's really bad and it was really your fault, it happened to me once that I made a big mistake and it was really all my fault. I said, I see this is really inconvenient for you, the client is really unhappy, so I offer to kind of withdraw my invoice for this job and you won't have to pay me because the client won't pay you either. So this was a very bad mistake and it only happened once. And the weird thing is it wasn't even a translation or a reviewing mistake of mine. It was simply a stupid, I clicked the wrong file when I delivered it. So I delivered kind of an older version instead of the one I did. And it even went further that they delivered it to someone else. And it was a whole ordeal. And of course it was fully my fault. I said, okay, you won't have to pay me for this, of course. In the future, they trust you more if you are honest with them, right? And then the process is kind of finished usually. But then I was thinking, can you actually do something to avoid this whole process, that it won't happen in the future? Because I had a few instances of in quick succession of negative feedback, and I was thinking, can I do something in my workflow that it won't happen again, or it will happen less? And I actually found out that honest and upfront communication is super important. So now when I do a translation and there are like several possibilities, for example, I decide for one, of course, always decide for one, but make use of comment sections, of comment functions in Word and in PDF and stuff. And also when you deliver a job, you always write an email with it, and you can use it as well for explanations. So always say, hey, at this part, I use this translation, but if the client wants to go more for this audience, maybe this word is better, you know. Sometimes it happens that I use a term from an official website, and the term is maybe a bit weird in this context. And if I use a term that's official, used by a brand or a company, but not really normal in the German sense, then I know already that this might cause some issues, but it's actually correct. So I will always write a comment, give the source that I took this text from. I say, look, they use this, it makes sense in this context, you should use this. Because like this, you can avoid negative feedback, you can avoid this whole ordeal of sending emails back and forth. And the client is happy because they can explain how they made a good decision, right? Because usually the decisions you prove, they are good because you have proof for it. And since I do this now for more than a year, and I feel like, I can't prove it of course, but I feel like I avoided many feedback loops just by providing more information to the client. It's because I do the research anyway, so just copy and paste the link. It's not really more work for me, right? But it can actually decrease the amount of work in the aftermath. And the last point that I was really struggling with in the beginning is don't get hung up on negative feedbacks. I actually wrote once, this was really a problem for me. When I get the negative feedback, I was stunned for a whole week. And then when you're in a bad mood and you need to continue working, the quality gets worse again, and then it starts over, it's a vicious circle. So actually you asked once in a Facebook group, how do you deal with negative feedback? I really struggled with this was maybe 3 years ago. I got a lot of good answers. I got videos sent, and they say, yeah, do like meditation. When you get the negative feedback, go out, go for a run, talk to someone, ask them, do you think this is bad? Because people usually give you perspective, right? You're in this bubble, you think your world is so important, everything matters. But then you talk to someone and they say, so what? It happens to me all the time at work. You can kind of get perspective sometimes from someone else and then move on. You just need to move on. It's a business transaction, things go wrong, same as in normal life, same as in private life as well. You apologize, you explain, you offer solutions, and then you move on. There you go. These are my tips for dealing with negative feedback. This can, of course, also applies if the negative feedback comes from your boss or from your co-workers, or even in your personal life. It's kind of always the same feedback loop, right? So really maybe think about in your life how you deal with it. Let me know in the comments if you have more tips on that. I hope this helps you, especially if you want to become a translator or you are already one. This information will come in handy, I think. I wish I knew this when I started. Please consider to subscribe to the channel. We are still growing. The goal is 100 subscribers by the end of the year. I think we can make it work. Thanks for watching, and see you next week with a new video. Bye bye.